Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
My friends, what is happening in the great state of Minnesota is absolutely inexcusable, and we are just, my friends, beginning to scratch the surface. Thanks to the independent journalist and YouTuber named Nick Shirley, and others out there that are doing the jobs of the mainstream media, the media that refuses to do its job. We should have known this sort of thing. We should have known this sort of thing a long time ago. It is a catastrophic failure for media, as though it needed another failure at all. But my friends, it is unacceptable. It is absolutely just mind-boggling what we are uncovering and finding in the state of Minnesota, and we'll talk about that today. Fraud, accountability, leadership failure, all of that in today's program. My friends, you know we're coming to you here from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, and maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels more like juggling than it feels like dealing with the numbers, the financial X's and O's. There's tax planning, estate work, investment choices, and a whole lot more. That's when Family Office Services can really make a difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their Family Office Services gives you access to a coordinated team with advanced option strategies, private equity, private credit, legal expertise, all under one roof. That's about simplifying. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for your future, making sure your legacy stays strong for generations. If you're ready for that next level of support, my friends, fear not, because Full Suite Wealth is here to help you. FullSuiteWealth.com. That's FullSuiteWealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. My friends, I think this country needs to focus more on building its legacy, in a sense, because this garbage that's happening in our states, in our cities, in our federal government is absolutely, positively inexcusable. It is mind-numbing to me to realize what we have found ourselves getting into, my friends. And so I'm going to talk about what's happening here. I've got a couple of stories that I want to reference on today's program. 3, in fact, regarding what's happening in Minnesota. Now, we've talked about this briefly. I've not dedicated a ton of time to this, but I am dedicating this episode to talking about this because this is, again, it's just unbelievable. The amount of waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, mismanagement, all of it, it is just absolutely unbelievable. Fox News here has an article. Headline here says, if I can pull it back up, scathing audit reveals more fraud concerns inside top Minnesota agency with fabricated documents. Misconduct. Minnesota GOP State Senator Mark Koran, I don't know, K-O-R-A-N, says the audit shows a complete breakdown of protecting taxpayer funds. I want to pause here. It is a remarkable thing to me. The amount of just a denial of common sense that's required to embrace the ideology of the left today. We have massive failures of our government at all levels, by the way. And at all levels, I mean at the federal level, that's obvious. They lose billions upon billions, maybe trillions of dollars. It is a disaster at the federal government level. We've seen some of that exposed through Doge. We've seen some of that exposed through how COVID was dealt with. We've seen some of that. There's so many examples of the federal government just absolutely creating havoc for the American people, mismanaging stuff. I mean, they lose money all the time. They can't account for what's happening in the finances that they're already in control of. But on top of that, they want to do more. They want to achieve more, or they want to accomplish more when they're not even hitting their core competencies. The Constitution, I don't want to be, the nerd over here. I love the Constitution, but I don't want to sound like the guy that says actually in the Constitution. But that's, what the Constitution is, this guiding landmark, this guiding document that says this is what the government's supposed to be doing. And it lays out what each branch is supposed to be doing. And in none of the things, if you look at the vast majority of what the government is doing today, none of it has to do, or very little of it has to do, with what is actually in the Constitution. Now, I want to be clear. I was joking when I love and revere the Constitution. It's one of the greatest documents ever written, that and the Declaration, as far as a secular document. But it frames some ideas, and it frames the way the government is supposed to work. Unfortunately, the average person doesn't know what's in those documents. They don't understand what's in the document. They don't understand how this country's been framed to function and operate. They don't understand, and candidly, they don't care. They've been conditioned to say, well, my opinion about this issue is that the government should do X, and then suddenly the government is doing it because the people are demanding it or whatever, and you've got representatives doing things that are nowhere in the Constitution. And so I think constantly, how do you bring attention to these sort of important core issues? How do you get people to read the Constitution? I try all different approaches and concepts to get people to at least stop and think why we do the things that we do, why the nation was framed, the government was framed the way that it was framed, and why we should care. Why we should care. Because this is these decisions, what we allow our government to do, are fundamentally important to, well, having a republic, number one, but also retaining our liberties, the rule of law, and the proper order of doing things. And so you have mismanagement at every level. It's obvious at the federal level. Doge exposed a lot of it. Again, we've got other examples of the government abusing all sorts of things. I mean, there's examples galore from the federal perspective, but there's plenty of examples at the state level as well. That's what we're talking about here, what's happening specifically in one of our 50 nifty United States here, the state of Minnesota. But there's problems, I'm telling you, at every level. You just dig slightly beneath the surface in your city or town, your local school board, your county government offices. There will be mismanagement and people who are doing things that they aren't really supposed to be doing, spending money on things inappropriately, or at least with less than stellar oversight. I mean, it is I'm telling you, every single place that you look. There might be examples here and there of government being run well, but I tell you what, that would be the exception and not the rule. And how this has become acceptable to me is mind-boggling. And how any person could say, after watching stories like this unfold, that government needs to do more, makes my head want to explode. Because it just defies logic and common sense. So let's look at this article here. A major state audit in Minnesota conducted by the nonpartisan Office of the Legislative Auditor found widespread failures and internal problems in the Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Administration, that's the BHA, its grant program, reaffirming concerns about massive fraud issues. The report released on Monday found that between July 1st, 2022 and December 31st, 2024, DHS, that's about 18 months by the way, DHS dished out more than $425 million in grants to over, to 830, I should say, organizations, the majority being non-governmental, and did not show proper oversight, that's shocking by the way, in watching over these taxpayer funds, which in many cases were meant to help those with addiction and mental health issues. Pause. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road. You have politicians or you have people out there who are talking about what government should do, and they always talk about some group that we should be helping. And if you don't want to help this group, you're a terrible human being. So here's some groups, just some examples that came up right here. People who struggle with addiction or mental health issues. And so they immediately, what they do is they pull at your heartstrings and they say, listen, dude, why can't you support some program that's designed to help these people? You know, you're doing well, you're living your life, you don't have these problems. You should show how thankful you are by giving your money to help these particular people. Now, let me pause for a moment. Listen, I'm not here to say that that's good or bad. I don't like that we always have to go to the government for these things to be funded and so forth. I don't know where this idea really took its root, or has its roots, but this is the way that we do this. And people say, yeah, I care about these people. These people have hard circumstances, and then people start inserting themselves and think, you know what, I'm fortunate I didn't have this problem. You know what, the government can do it. Well, but the government does it pitifully, my friends, as we'll see here in the case of Minnesota. And so the starting point is they come to you and say, well, you're healthy. You don't have addiction problems. And by the way, if you have addiction or mental health problems or things like that, this has nothing to do with that for me. I'm just painting the picture of what happens. So you can insert other issues there as well. And you can see how this works. Okay, you go to the taxpayer, you say, my goodness, we have this problem in our community. We want to do this program to help them. And that's enough for many people to say, wow, let's do this. Well, what are you going to do? Who's going to run this? How are we going to be determining who gets the money and what sort of measurables, KPIs we have here to make sure that we're actually doing what we set out to do? There's none of that. You'll find out there's none of that as I read this story. Or maybe there's the intention to have that, but in reality, it doesn't materialize. And now this is an egregious example, but I'm telling you, and you know this happens everywhere. Maybe not to this degree, but in some way, shape, manner, or form. I've got examples. I'll tell you some stories here as the program unfolds of things that I've run into personally. As it comes to federal grants and all this sort of stuff. The audit, the article says, found missing progress reports and discovered BHA, that's the organization giving these grants, could not show it had completed all required monitoring visits. So basically, the progress reports weren't there in the files, didn't exist, or they don't know where they are. The people handing out the money did not complete all the required, right? So when you tell the taxpayer or you develop this program, this is what we're going to do. These are the requirements. This is how we're going to measure it. We're going to go and look at this. We're going to make sure they're doing that. We're going to stay on top of it because it seems like, wow, that seems like the easy part to do. You get in your car, you go over and you look around. You show up with your clipboard or your whatever you got. They file digital reports. I don't know. It's government, so they're probably faxing stuff in still. But you go over there, you do your rounds, you make sure that what they tell you they're doing. First of all, you make sure that they tell you what they're doing. how they're using the funds, why those funds that they've gotten are relevant to the rules of the program, and you check off all these things along the way. Should they get the money? Yes. Are they doing what the money, what they said they were going to do? Yes. Who are they serving? Yeah, I saw some people over there. There's no people. In the case of the Somalia, preschool and daycare fraud, there were no kids in some of these places. I don't know if there were kids in any of them. That you realize how stupid the government has to be, or inept, or apathetic, or something. It's either that they're stupid, gullible, they don't care. It's got to be something like that to not even know that there's no kids. There's no kids in the Somali daycare and preschool scandal. There's no kids being served. They build offices that look like kids should be in there, but they've never seen kids in there. It's just, it's comical in a sense. It's not because it's real. It's your dollars. It's your government. It's my government. But it's also, this is the stuff that we've been told isn't happening. Remember when Doge was finding all the mismanaged funds? We were told, no way there are dead people on Social Security. Folks, I would bet just about anything that there are absolutely dead people. I don't know how many, but dead people getting Social Security. I would venture to say there's dead people getting any benefit you can imagine. I would venture to say that there is fraud in every single program. Now, it may be a case here and there, or it could be widespread like we're finding out with what's happening here. And how did we find this out? We found this out because of a citizen journalist, an independent journalist, a YouTuber, a 23-year-old guy has uncovered more about this than the local, CBS, ABC, Fox affiliates, whatever, whoever I left out there, NBC. All those folks in Minnesota combined. No CNN, no Fox News, no take your pick down the line, MSNBC. In fact, they've probably got experts on there telling us why having concern for these funds is racist and everything else. But they didn't even require the reports be completed that were required. They didn't require all the monitoring visits, and they had no documentation at all. So some of these files are completely empty. We gave money to XYZ organization, and there's a file in the file cabinet, maybe not even that, but maybe there's an empty file folder or a digital file on the desktop somewhere with no files in it. And they're giving these people a total in that 18-month period of $425 million. That sound reasonable to you? Additionally, the article says auditors discovered what appeared to be a backdated or newly created documentation that did not exist before the audit, suggesting an effort to retroactively manufacture paperwork to show compliance. So the auditors were turning up the heat on these people, and instead of actually figuring out, okay, we messed up, how do we do what we're supposed to do? They say, let's cover our tracks and let's make it look like we were actually doing our job all the time. Of course, this is human nature. This is predictable. This is happening. How does this happen? How does it happen? With so much money, with so much oversight. Remember, these people that run for office, they're all responsible for this at some level. How do these things get by the notice of everybody? How? The article continues. In one instance, the report found that a grant manager approved over $600,000 in payments and later left the government agency to go work for the grantee. So there was someone who worked for the government who was overseeing the grant. That person personally approved $600,000 in payments to the individual, to the organization getting the grant. And then they said, gee whiz, I'm on the wrong side of this. Let me go. I'm just ostensibly, allegedly here. I'm giving all this money to this group, probably not doing anything with it. They got to have shadow employees to pay. I'm just saying, this is a mess. Then they go work for them. The OLA report shows a complete breakdown in how DHS's Behavioral Health Administration manages hundreds of millions in taxpayer-funded grant. Republican State Senator Mark Corin, whatever, said in a press release, BHA failed to verify that grantees were providing the services that they were paid for, failed to put basic financial controls in place, and then created documentation after the fact to mislead auditors. Friends, my wife and I have a 16-year-old son. He's got he started doing some stuff where he's making money, and it sounds like if he had a lemonade stand today, that he has more controls over the money than what we have in our federal government's grant system. This is absolutely unbelievable. Minnesotans, continuing reading the article here, deserve integrity from state agencies. Fabricating evidence after an audit begins is unacceptable. Dare I say that's illegal. It obstructs the OLA's work and prevents DHS from correcting its failures. The finding that a DHS manager approved a large grant and later became a paid consultant for the same grantee is a blatant conflict of interest. This kind of misconduct erodes public trust and undermines the effectiveness of grant programs. You don't say. The audit also found that when employees were surveyed, 73% of them said they did not receive the necessary training to properly administer manage grants. I guess there's a missing "and" there. With one employee saying executive leadership has repetitively shown staff that they won't take the staff's concerns or questions seriously until something serious happens or it makes the news. That gets everybody's attention when it makes the news. And of course, you got a complicit media that doesn't cover this stuff. So it's a perfect storm, my friends, a perfect storm indeed. I just looked at the clock and I've got to wrap it up here, this segment. Quick reminder, friends, if you're tired of spending your hard-earned money at businesses that turn around and support leftist causes, I've got just the thing for you. It's called Freedom Marketplace. It's our online directory, searchable directory of businesses that share your values. These are businesses that have vowed not to support leftist candidates, leftist causes, and you can go to freedommarketplace.net to find good, patriotic businesses pushing in the same direction that you are pushing. Check it out today, freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. Liberty and business for all, my friends. Time out for me. You're listening to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back here in just a minute. Disastrous, my friend. This entire thing is absolutely, unequivocally disastrous. It's disastrous in the most simple and obvious of terms for the American taxpayer. It's disastrous for people who care about the way that their nation is governed, the way that their states are run, the way that the government oversees whatever supposedly is happening in their community and in their state. And it's disastrous for people who put so much hope and trust in their government. I am amazed. I really am. I'm amazed at when I say on here that the radical left worships government. I am not exaggerating on that. I'm not. Now, I'm not saying every person who has a leftist viewpoint or every person who is a Democrat has government as their God. That is not what I'm saying. I'm speaking specifically about those who constantly tell us that government has all the answers. They tell us, remember, the communists, my friends, they told us out in the clear, out in the open, they told us that government was God. You have to study this very long to realize, for example, in the Soviet Union, that's exactly what government was. Government was effectively, they try it. Of course, it fails miserably. Nothing can replace God, but they try to. In fact, they let you. If you study the Soviet Union, my goodness, my friends, it is such a dark and evil period of time, and government, oppressive, just terrible, terrible stuff happened to people. Go back and read things like Fox's Book of Martyrs, and you'll find stories. You'll find stories of people who were persecuted, tortured, killed for their faith. I shared on here an example of one of those. It's been a long time since I read it, so I might be getting the details. They're a little bit fuzzy. But I remember a group of troops went in and found a group of Christians. They stripped them naked. It was in one of the places that's very cold in the winter in Russia. They marched them out to a frozen pond, and they encircled them, basically waiting for them to freeze to death. These believers were singing worship songs and hymnals and that sort of thing as they began to literally freeze to death and die one by one. And one of the guards was so moved that he stripped down, took off his heavy coat and his military uniform, his boots, and he walked out there and he sang alongside them, and I believe died with those believers. There's stories like that. Because why? Why were they doing that to people who simply believe in God? Well, it's because government was God. That's what they wanted. That's what this ideology requires. What government says goes, and government knows best because government is, I guess, you've got the best and the brightest making the decisions for the rest of us idiots out there. And so some people fall at the altar at the foot of government and worship it. Literally worship government. This is what it requires people to do. And it fails. It fails so miserably every single time that it's tried. Listen, I know that there's problems in any organization, including the Christian church. There are certainly examples of people who have abused their power, abused young people. These stories, there's stories everywhere, right? There are stories of this. But those are examples of people who don't follow the teachings of what the faith requires. Those things are not built in. They're not built into the faith. What's built into the faith are safeguards and morality, rules to prevent these sort of things from happening. But when humanity is any person, right? Any socialist, any communist, any benevolent dictator becomes God, then it's no longer that they're not following the tenets of their belief. That comes from someone else. This person that's the benevolent dictator, the leader who has all the answers, is by default the example everybody else should follow. And the example they set is an example of oppression, of torture, of heartlessness, of killing, murder. It is awful. Go back and look at the 20th century. Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong. Go back and look at these folks. It's obvious. These folks believe that they should have total control, that they should be they're ultimately worthy. That means that they should be worshiped. That's what they think. Now, the people involved in this garbage, here's a headline. Many of these folks are so arrogant and so confident of their ways and that they'll never be caught or held accountable. But one of them has been. This is at redstate.com. This is written by Terry Christoph. Headline here: Somali fraud ringleader's luxury lifestyle implodes as judge seizes Porsche, diamonds, and cash. It looks like justice has finally decided to visit some of the Minnesota fraudsters who've enjoyed spectacularly luxurious lifestyles during Democrat Governor Tim Walz's time in office. Now, a lot of people, by the way, this is me, not the article, believe that Tim Walz is at least guilty of malpractice here as governor. How do you have billions of dollars? I think I saw $3 to $4 billion. Is that what I saw? That they believe has been inappropriately spent or whatever. How do you let that happen on your watch? How do you see that much money just be fraudulently used without noticing it? So some people say he was in on it. That's an allegation. That's not been proven. But I would say at least minimally, the people who say this happened on his watch and that he was not paying any attention, that's at least probably the starting point here. Anyway, continues here. One of those fraudsters, I'm reading from redstate.com, Amy Bach, 44, was a ringleader in the Feeding Our Future scam, and boy, did she enjoy flaunting the fabulous life she acquired off the backs of hardworking taxpayers. So again, like the other examples of the starting point, you got something in here. Listen, there are good causes out there that need to be funded. I work with some of these I used to run a local boys and girls club. We did good work in the community. This is not a blanket indictment of all these organizations, but it's the starting point. Feeding Our Future, right? So having a program that feeds people, young people in need, I mean, who's going to be against that? So that's the starting point. You got this program that everybody has to basically be in favor of, because who really wants to be on the other side of this thing? So it continues here. All that is coming to a screeching halt after a judge ordered Bach to surrender a treasure trove of luxury items that someone on a typical non-profit salary would never be able to afford. See also the aforementioned hardworking taxpayers. A judge signed off last week on a preliminary forfeiture ordering Bach to cough up, among other things, her Porsche Panamera, a diamond necklace, her Louis Vuitton purse, and around, are you ready for this, $3.7 million in cash and money squirreled away in various bank accounts. The forfeiture of her luxury lifestyle comes after Bach was found guilty. This is B-O-C-K, by the way, not B-A-C-H like Johann Sebastian. This is Bach, B-O-C-K. But where did I leave off here? Bach was found guilty last March on federal charges of wire fraud, bribery, and conspiracy in connection with what has been called the nation's largest COVID-19 fraud scheme. So now we're on to uncovering some of the fraud that happened with COVID-19 funds. She's currently awaiting sentencing, but can keep herself busy for the time being, handing over all those fancy toys she loved to flaunt. The Feeding Our Future scandal was one of the first welfare-related scams to rock Minnesota and helped shine a national spotlight on the massive fraud for being perpetrated in the state under Walz's watch. Amy Bach founded the nonprofit in 2016 to feed children in need, and the group had a rather modest annual budget of $3 to $4 million. So I got to stop there because I looked at the time again. I'm in this deep today, and I'm losing track of time. Friends, you know, one of the biggest challenges that we as conservatives have is finding ways to ensure our values align with the things that we do, the way that we live. That includes how we invest our money. That's why I love what the team at 48 Financial is doing. They specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with our faith and values, so we're not funding things that go completely against what we believe in. They do the heavy lifting. All you have to do is complete the assessment. They'll help align your investments with your purpose, with your goals, with your values, with your beliefs. All you have to do is complete that assessment at 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, because our money should work for our values. Quick time out, my friends. Back here in just a minute. All of this, my friends, is absolutely remarkable. It is remarkable what we have been subjected to, what we have allowed to happen at state government level, local government level, of course, at the federal level. This is blowing the top off of these scandals. The more you dig, the more you find. Now, the question is, what are we going to do about it? Are these people going to be held accountable? Some of them already are, but are we going to hold everybody accountable, not just the people at the lower levels, but the people who are actually allowing this to happen? Are we going to hold them accountable? Maybe they're not legally responsible, but shouldn't we at least hold them politically responsible and vote them out of office if in fact they are responsible for these things. Are we going to do that? I certainly hope so. It's required for us. This is part of our jobs as people who live in a free country. We have to hold our leadership accountable and make sure that they are not engaging in, at least in fraud. My goodness, we should be able to do that, my friends. Let's face it, living with discomfort is tough. And while prescription medications can help, they often come with a long, long list of side effects, not to mention the risk of dependency with some of those. That's why people are exploring natural options. Options like Kratom from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. This is a family-run company that does things the right way. They work directly with Indonesian farmers. They lab test every batch that they import for safety and making sure that it's clean. There's no synthetics, no chemicals, no surprises, just honest, natural kratom that's been used for generations. Friends, the real problems that you've heard about kratom, if you've heard some of the horror stories, come from the synthetic blends, the contaminated junk, or the sellers that aren't interested in educating you, instead are looking to make a quick buck and to sell something that in many cases not even real kratom. That's not what Christopher's does. Christopher's keeps it real, keeps it clean, keeps you informed. You can start with their Kratom starter pack by using discount code Todd Huff. You'll save 10% there at Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. Okay. Don't have a lot of time left here, and I am into this today. I'm just blown away even the more that I talk about this. Going back to the article at Red State, which again, these will be on our stack of stuff at the website, ToddHuffShow.com. Just look for today's issue, and you'll find these articles if you want to read more. When COVID-19 hit, it says, Feeding Our Future experienced some serious mission creep. That's, of course, when you stray from your mission statement, what you're seeking to do, and you actually begin to add in other things. But they did that because the rules, the article says, were loosened. This was during COVID. And oversight was diminished, leading Bach to allow sponsors in her network to submit claims without normal verification. Here's what happened. As executive director of Feeding Our Future, Bach approved meal sites, some of which were fake meal sites, then certified the claims, signing off on the reimbursements from the Minnesota Department of Education. She would soon preside over a network that claimed to have served 91 million meals, for which prosecutors say scammers fraudulently received nearly $250 million in federal funds, a scale of growth that far outpaced the nation's pre-pandemic size and internal capacity. Remember, this was an organization that was doing, $3 to $4 million. That was their annual budget to feed children. Now they're doing, during COVID or after COVID, we're doing $250 million. And later filings and sentencing, the article says here, released, described the total impact as closer to $300 million. Attorney General Pam Bondi has suggested it may reach $400 million. Wild, wild stuff. I think I got those numbers confused with the Minnesota numbers for the daycare and childcare fraud. I believe that that might have been, that was several billion. I want to say 9 billion. I don't know. We don't know. The information is still coming through on this. Look, all this is to say, I don't know to what level, if any, Tim Walz was involved. I think minimally you could say for this to happen in the government of your state while you are the governor of the state. I mean, listen, that's pretty damning. That doesn't mean that you necessarily were directly involved, but how do you lose track of billions of dollars that are being spent on things that aren't real? How does that happen? At best, you're simply inept. At worst, you could be actually, at least logically anyway, this is the other possibility, you're part of the criminal enterprise. Could be anywhere in between there, but there's no good explanation for this for Tim Walz. And he was almost, my friends, I know in one respect he and Kamala lost the election pretty handily, but in another sense, it wasn't that far off when you think a few states here and there could have flipped the 2024 election. He could very well be our vice president of the United States right now. And we wouldn't know any of this. None of this. We wouldn't, I don't know, maybe Nick Shirley, he still would have done his job, but they would have silenced him. Who knows what would have happened then, my friends. But anyway, I'm out of time. Gotta run. Thanks for listening, SDG.